The City in the Rain. The city was a place where the rain never stopped, where the streets gleamed with the sheen of oil and the air was thick with the scent of old coal and unwashed bodies. Neon signs flickered above the alleys, casting long, jagged shadows that stretched like the fingers of the damned. It was a place where justice was a word spoken in the dark, where men dealt in secrets and women sold their silence for a few dollars. The kind of city that didn't care who you were, so long as you had the right connections or the right enemies. Detective Sam Halloway had seen it all before. He had walked these streets for years, chasing ghosts and ghosts chasing him in return. He had learned that in a city like this, justice was a myth, and revenge was the only law that held any meaning. He had seen men rise from the gutter and fall into it again, had watched as the powerful walked freely while the weak were dragged down by the weight of their own sins. He had once believed in the law, but that belief had long since been buried beneath the weight of 1,000 unsolved cases and the ghosts of those who had died because the system had failed them. Tonight the city was quiet, but the kind of quiet that preceded something bad. The rain had picked up, drumming against the pavement like a warning. Somewhere in the distance a car horn wailed, and then the sound was swallowed by the storm. Holloway lit a cigarette, the flame flickering in the dark, and took a long drag. The smoke curled into the air, a thin line of defiance against the cold. He had a case to solve, and it was already beginning to take shape in his mind. There had been a murder, the kind that didn't make the newspapers. No headlines, no official reports, just a body found in an alley. A name that had once been known but had since been forgotten. The kind of death that didn't matter to the city, but that still left a stain on the pavement where it had happened. And Halloway knew that in a city like this, every death was a thread in a larger, more complicated story. He had seen enough to know that this was more than just a simple case of justice. There was something else at play, something that had once been known but had since been forgotten, been buried too deep for the city to see. And as the rain continued to fall, Halloway felt the weight of it pressing against his chest, like the burden of a secret he had yet to uncover. The murder in the alley. The body had been found just after midnight, slumped in a chair at the edge of an abandoned warehouse, the rain having done little to wash away the blood that had already begun to pool around the corpse. The man was dressed in a suit that had once been fine, though now it was stained and frayed, the fabric betraying the wife that had once been lived within it. His face was pale, the skin stretched tight over the bones, and his eyes were open, fixed in a look of something between shock and resignation. The wound in. His chest was deep, the knife still embedded in the flesh, the handle slick with blood. Detective Halloway knelt beside the body, his hat pulled low over his eyes, the rain soaking through his coat as he examined the scene. The alley was narrow, flanked by rusted metal fences that had long since ceased to serve any purpose. The warehouse behind them was a relic of the city's past, its windows shattered, the door hanging by a single rusted hinge. There was no sign of a struggle, no footprints in the mud that might have led to the killer. It was as if the man had simply sat there, waiting for death to come. Halloway reached for the man's wrist, feeling for a pulse, but the body was already cold. He stood, brushing the rain from his hands, and looked around. There was no sign of a struggle, no evidence of a weapon other than the one that had already taken the man's life. The only clue was the symbol carved into the wall beside the body, a jagged mark that looked like a stylized letter, though Halloway couldn't immediately place it. He had seen it before, but not in this context. The man's name was Martin Grimes, a name that had once been spoken with some degree of respect. A few years ago, Grimes had been a respected lawyer, known for his sharp mind and his ability to navigate the tangled web of the city's legal system. But that was before the case that had ruined him. Halloway had followed that case, had watched as Grimes had been dragged through the mud, his reputation shattered by a single misstep. He had been accused of embezzlement, a charge that had been quietly dropped after a series of threats and a few well-placed bribes. The man had disappeared after that, and Holloway had assumed he had gone underground, or worse, had been silenced by someone who had wanted him out of the way. Now, he was dead, and the city had once again found a way to bury its secrets. But Halloway knew better than to believe that this was just another case of justice served. There was something else at play here, something that had gone unnoticed by the people who had long since stopped caring about the lives that were lost in the shadows. And as Halloway looked at the symbol on the wall, he felt the first stirrings of a case that was going to take more than just a few nights of sleep to solve. The search for answers, Halloway moved through the city like a man who had long since stopped believing in the law, his steps measured, his eyes scanning the streets for any sign that might lead him to the truth. He had seen enough murders to know that the real story never appeared in the newspapers. It was always hidden in the cracks of the pavement, in the silence of the alleyways, in the unspoken words of those who had seen too much. And now, with Martin Grimes dead and the symbol carved into the wall, he knew that this was no ordinary case. He started with the people who had known Grimes best. The first was a former associate, a man named Henry Cole, who had once worked with Grimes on a high-profile case that had ended in disgrace. Halloway found Cole in a backroom bar, the kind of place where men whispered secrets and drank cheap whiskey. The man was older now, his face lined with years of regret, and he looked at Halloway with the wary eyes of a man who had already seen the worst of the city. "You shouldn't be here," Cole said, his voice low. "This isn't your case anymore." Halloway lit a cigarette, the flame flickering in the dim light. "Grimes is dead," he said, "and I think someone wanted to make sure he stayed that way." Cole exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You don't want to know what happened to him, Sam. You don't want to know what he did," Cole said, his voice low. "This isn't be here," Cole said, his voice low, but firm. "Tell me." Cole hesitated for a moment, then reached for his glass, taking a long drink before speaking. Grimes was always a good man, but he had a way of getting in too deep. He took a case that was supposed to be closed, and he found out something that someone didn't want him to know. He was going to expose them, but then he disappeared. I don't know if he was killed or if he ran, but now he's dead, and I think it was because of that case. Halloway's mind was already working through the possibilities. If Grimes had been involved in a case that had been buried, then there was a chance that someone had wanted to silence him. But why now? What had changed? He left Cole with a warning and a promise that he would be back, and he went to the next name on his list. Martin Grimes's former employer, a man who had once been one of the most powerful figures in the city. The man had long since retired, but Halloway knew that even in retirement he still had his ears and his eyes in the right places. The man was older now, his face lined with the weight of years, but his eyes still held the sharpness of a man who had once ruled the city with an iron fist. He listened as Halloway told him what he knew, his expression unreadable. "I don't know what you're looking for, Sam," the man said finally, "but if you're going down this road, you better be ready for what you might find." Halloway didn't answer. He had already made up his mind. The truth was out there. He wasn't going to stop until he found it. As he walked back through the rain-soaked streets, he felt the weight of the case pressing against him. He had seen too many men fall in this city, and he had always believed that justice was something that could be found, even if it was buried deep beneath the surface. But now, as he looked at the symbol carved into the wall, he wondered if this was a case that would ever be solved, or if it was just another one of the city's secrets, waiting to be forgotten. The shadow in the city. The name came to Halloway in the form of a letter slipped beneath his door in the middle of the night. It was unsigned, but the handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, precise, and deliberate. The message was simple. "He knows what you're looking for." It was the first time Halloway had seen the name in years, but the memory of it was as sharp as the knife that had killed Grimes. Elias Vane, a man who had once walked the same streets as Halloway, had once been a man of law, and had once believed in justice. But Vane had been a man who had fallen too far, and the city had long since forgotten his name. Halloway had heard the rumors. Vane had been a lawyer, a man with a sharp mind and a sharper temper. He had once been one of the most respected figures in the city, but that had changed when he had taken on a case that had exposed corruption at the highest levels. The case had been buried, the evidence had been lost, and Vane had disappeared. Some said he had been killed. Others said he had gone underground, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Now, he was back. Halloway found him in a place that had once been a law office, now a crumbling building that had long since been abandoned. The windows were shattered, the walls covered in graffiti, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. But Vane was there, waiting for him. He was older now, his face lined with the weight of years, but his eyes still held the fire of a man who had once believed in justice. He didn't speak at first, just watching Halloway with the same intensity that had once made him. The windows were shattered, the walls covered in graffiti, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. But Vane was there, waiting for him. He was older now, his face lined with the weight of years, but his eyes still held the fire of a man who had once believed in justice. A formidable opponent. "You found the symbol," Vane said finally, his voice low, measured. "You know what it means." Halloway didn't answer. He had seen it before, had seen it carved into the walls of places that had once been sacred, places where justice had been served and then betrayed. He had seen it on the doors of men who had once believed in the law but had been silenced by those who had wanted to keep their secrets hidden. "You think I killed him," Vane said, his voice steady. "But I didn't." Halloway studied him, the weight of the past pressing against him. "Then who did?" Vane exhaled slowly, his eyes dark with something that looked like regret. "The same people who made me disappear." The word sent a chill through Halloway. He had always known that the city was full of men who would kill for their secrets, but he had never expected to see one of them again. Vane had been a man who had once fought for justice, and now he was here, standing before him, ready to fight again. But this time, it wasn't just about justice, it was about revenge. And Halloway knew that whatever had happened to Martin Grimes had only been the beginning. The weight of Justice Halloway sat in the dim glow of a single bulb, the flickering light casting long shadows across the walls of the abandoned office. Vane's words echoed in his mind, but they did little to ease the weight pressing against his chest. He had spent years chasing justice through the city's labyrinthine streets, but now, for the first time in a long while, he was beginning to wonder if justice was something that could ever be truly found. He had always believed that the law was the only thing that could bring order to a city like this. That even in the darkest corners, where men did things that no one else would ever know about, there was still a system in place to ensure that those who broke the rules would one day be held accountable. But now, as he sat here, staring at the man who had once been one of the city's most respected lawyers, he was beginning to see the cracks in that belief. Vane had been one of the few men who had ever stood against the city's corruption, who had dared to believe that justice could be served even in the face of overwhelming odds. And yet he had been silenced, not by the law, but by those who had the power to make sure that justice never reached them. The thought of it made Halloway's stomach churn. He had seen it before, but never like this. He had always known that the city was a place where the powerful could do as they pleased, where the weak were left to fend for themselves. But now he was beginning to understand that justice was not something that was simply broken. It was something that had been twisted, bent to the will of those who had the most to gain from its failure. And he was beginning to wonder if he was one of them. The thought was a bitter one, but it was one that had been growing in him for years. He had spent his life chasing criminals, but he had always done so with the belief that he was on the right side of the law, that he was fighting for something greater than himself. But now, as he looked at Vane and saw the same fire that had once burned in his own eyes, he felt something shift inside him. He had always believed that justice was the only thing that could bring order to the chaos of the city. But now, he was beginning to wonder if justice was just another word for the same thing that had taken Grimes's life. He exhaled slowly, his hands tightening around the edges of the table. He had always told himself that he was different from the men who had come before him, that he had never let the city's corruption take him. But now he was beginning to see that he had been wrong. The weight of the past pressed against him, and for the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure if he was fighting for justice or if he was just another man trying to survive in a city that had long since stopped caring about the lives that were lost in its shadows. The confrontation in the shadows. The rain had stopped, but the city still felt the weight of its silence. Halloway stood outside the abandoned warehouse, the symbol carved into the wall still fresh in his mind. He had followed the trail, had pieced together the fragments of the past, and now he was standing at the edge of the truth. He had no idea what would come next, but he knew that whatever it was, it would not be easy. The warehouse was dark, the only light coming from the moon that peeked through the broken windows. Halloway stepped inside, his boots echoing against the floor as he moved deeper into the building. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and something else, something that smelled like fear. He had been here before, had walked these same halls, had seen the same kind of men who had made their lives in the shadows of the city. But this time was different. This time was different. This time he wasn't just chasing a ghost. He was standing in the path of something that had been waiting for him. He found him in the back, standing in front of a large metal door that had been sealed shut. Elias Vane turned as Halloway approached, his eyes sharp, his expression unreadable. "You were right about the symbol," Halloway said, his voice low. "It was on the wall, and it meant something, but I still don't know what." Vane exhaled slowly, his hands resting on the door. "It means that the city is still broken, that justice is still a myth." He looked at Halloway, his voice steady. "You think I killed Grimes, but I didn't. I didn't kill him because I wanted revenge. I killed him because I wanted revenge. I killed him because I wanted to make sure that the people who had ruined him would never get away with it." Halloway's jaw tightened. "So you're saying he was killed by someone else?" Vane nodded. "Someone who wanted to make sure that the truth never came out." He looked at Halloway steady. "You think I killed Grimes, but I didn't. I didn't kill him because I wanted revenge." Admit's jaw tightened. He was saying he won Roan. His one were say, who knew that if Grimes had lived, he would have exposed them. Halloway felt the weight of the words pressing against him. He had spent years chasing justice, had believed that the law was the only thing that could bring order to the chaos of the city. But now, as he stood here, looking at the man who had once been one of the city's most respected lawyers, he was beginning to see the truth. Justice was not something that could be found in the law. It was something that had to be fought for, something that had to be taken from those who had stolen it. And now, he was standing at the edge of that fight. He looked at Vane, his mind racing with the possibilities. "So what are you going to do?" he asked. "You're not going to let them get away with it, are you?" Vane's eyes darkened. "I already have." Halloway's breath caught in his throat. "You mean you already took them down?" Vane nodded. "I did what I had to do. I made sure that the people who had ruined Grimes would never be able to do it again." Halloway felt the ground shift beneath him. He had always believed that justice was something that could be found, that it was something that could be fought for. But now, as he looked at Vane, he was beginning to see that justice was something else entirely. It was something that had to be taken, something else entirely. It was something that had to be fought for with blood and fire. And now, he was standing at the edge of that fight. Halloway felt the ground shift beneath him. He had always believed that justice was something that could be fought. He had got Merrill! Aftermath of justice. The city was silent in the aftermath, the rain having long since stopped, but the weight of the events that had transpired still lingered in the air. Halloway stood at the edge of the warehouse, the wind tugging at his coat as he looked at the door that had once been sealed shut. Vane was gone, just as he had always been, always slipping through the cracks of the city, always disappearing just when the truth was about to be uncovered. Halloway exhaled slowly, his mind still reeling from the revelation. Vane had done what he had always claimed to do, taken justice into his own hands. He had made sure that the people who had ruined Grimes would never be able to do it again. But at what cost? The city had always been a place where justice was a myth, where the powerful walked freely and the weak were left to suffer. But now something had changed. The people who had once believed that the law would protect them had seen the truth for what it was, and Halloway knew that the city would never be the same again. He turned away from the warehouse, his steps slow, his mind still tangled in the weight of what had happened. He had always believed that justice could be found, that the law could be trusted. But now he wasn't so sure. He had seen the truth, and it had changed him. The city would continue its endless cycle of corruption, of men who rose and fell, of secrets that were buried and then unearthed. But Halloway knew that he would never be the same. He had seen the truth, and now he had to decide what to do with it. The rain had stopped, but the city was still waiting, its lights flickering like the ghosts of the past. And Halloway, for the first time in a long while, was no longer sure if he was fighting for justice, or if he was just another man trying to survive in a city that had long since stopped caring about the lives that were lost in its shadows. The end of the road. The city had always been a place where justice was a word spoken in the dark, where the powerful walked freely and the weak were left to suffer. Halloway had spent his life chasing the truth, believing that the law was the only thing that could bring order to the chaos of the streets. But now, as he stood at the edge of the warehouse, the rain having long since stopped, he was beginning to see the truth for what it was. Justice had never been something that could be found in the law. It had always been something that had to be taken, something that had to be fought for with blood and fire. And now he was no longer sure if he was fighting for justice or if he was just another man trying to survive in a city that had long since stopped caring about the lives that were lost in its shadows. He had always believed that the law was the only thing that could bring order to the chaos of the city. That even in the darkest corners, where men did things that no one else would ever know about, there was still a system in place to ensure that those who broke the rules would one day be held accountable. But now, as he looked at the city and the people who had lived and died in its streets, he was beginning to see the cracks in that belief. The city would continue its endless cycle of corruption, of men who rose and fell, of secrets that were buried and then unearthed. But Halloway knew that he would never be the same. He had seen the truth, and now he had to decide what to do with it. He turned away from the warehouse, his steps slow, his mind still tangled in the weight of what had happened. He spent his life chasing justice, but now he was beginning calm to wonder if justice was just another word for the same thing that had taken Grimes's life. The city was still waiting, its lights flickering like the ghosts of the past. And Halloway, for the first time in a long while, was no longer sure if he was fighting for justice or if he was just another man trying to survive in a city that had long since stopped caring about the lives that were lost in its shadows. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories. Hit the notification bell to be notified of new stories when they become available. Feel free to leave a comment and tell me if you enjoyed the story and want to hear more like it.